Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
Thanksgiving had always smelled the same in our house, like burnt sugar crust on store-bought pie, rosemary that tried too hard to be elegant, and turkey that dried out somewhere between tradition and passive aggression. We weren't a hug and pray before you eat kind of family. We were a paper napkins, clinking glasses, interrupt each other, brag about credit scores kind of family. And every single year, I sat at the same damn corner of the table, beside the sideboard with the broken drawer and across from my brother Kyle's massive, always too loud presence. It was a ritual, almost holy in its predictability. And this year, I came prepared with the same armor I always wore, tight smile, nods at the right moments, and just enough distance in my eyes that no one ever looked too closely. My mom, Nancy, wore her hostess apron, the one with the wine stains and faded sunflowers, and paraded around the kitchen like a commander inspecting troops. She loved hosting Thanksgiving more than she loved any of us individually, and maybe even more than she loved Dad. Her holiday voice was chirpy and tight, like she was always one bad comment away from throwing a deviled egg across the room. She piled my plate with stuffing, the only thing she could cook well, and tapped the spoon on my plate like a judge, laying down a sentence. "There you go, Rachel. That should fill you up for a while." It was her first jab of the evening, not the last. Kyle, between bites of cranberry sauce he hadn't made and jokes he'd stolen from podcasts, started talking about his new promotion. Regional something of something. He always made it sound more important than it probably was, and Dad clapped him on the back like he'd just announced a Nobel. "You're really moving up, son," he said. "Proud of you." I nodded, said that's great, because that's what you're supposed to say when your family treats mediocrity like excellence. My dad turned to me, eyes flicking over my cardigan like it offended him. "Still doing that art stuff?" he asked. "Graphic design," I said, forcing another bite of stuffing down. "Been freelancing full-time this year." He raised an eyebrow like he couldn't decide whether that was a confession or a cry for help. "Huh," he muttered. "Well, long as it pays the bills." It did, but they didn't know I'd helped pay theirs too. Dinner was halfway through when it came. The moment I think I'd been waiting for without realizing it. The gravy boat had been passed, the wine opened, the small talk exhausted. The room was full of chewing and clinking and small sighs of indigestion. Then my mom, without looking up, said it just like a throwaway line in a bad sitcom. "You know, Rachel," she said, her voice airy, sweetened with just enough malice to be poisonous, "I think it's time you stop relying on us." She didn't look at me. She just reached for the salt and kept eating, like she hadn't just detonated a quiet little bomb under my plate. The room went still. Not silent. My dad cleared his throat. Carl sipped his drink. Someone's fork scraped a plate, but still in that way that happens when everyone pretends nothing just happened. I didn't speak. I didn't look at anyone. I didn't even put my fork down. I just smiled, like I'd practiced it, like I'd been waiting for this exact line, this exact moment, and I kept eating. Because what do you do when the people who owe you the most decide to act like you're the one in debt? They didn't know. They never asked. They just assumed. Assumed that Rachel, the quiet one, the unmarried one, the no-kids disappointment who didn't post enough pictures on Facebook, was the one being carried. They didn't know that Mom's cell phone plan was under my name. That Kyle's truck was insured because I'd quietly paid off the last 2 missed premiums. That the house they lived in had been refinanced 5 years ago with my credit because their scores were in the toilet. I'd done it because it was family. I never brought it up, never held it over their heads. But now? Now she wanted to pretend I was the one depending on them? I chewed that turkey like it was leather, and it might as well have been. I tasted nothing. My mouth was full of smoke and silence, and the rising burn of something old and angry climbing up my throat. But I swallowed it. I kept smiling. I nodded when they made jokes. I asked for seconds of green bean casserole. I complimented the pie crust. I did everything I was supposed to do. And as I scraped the last bit of stuffing from my plate, I made a decision. A quiet, sharp, final little decision that clicked into place like the lid on a Tupperware dish. I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would stop relying on them. Hell, I'd stop letting them rely on me. The thing is, when someone's been giving you oxygen for years and you didn't even notice, the second they take it away, you don't suffocate. You finally breathe. So I laughed at a joke I didn't hear. I refilled Kyle's wine. I helped Mom clear the dishes. I wiped the counter. I kissed everyone goodnight. And the whole time I smiled. But in my head, something snapped. You ever keep a secret so long, so deep, that it stops feeling like a secret and starts feeling like a sickness? That's what it was like with my family. For years, I kept my mouth shut and my bank account open. I didn't do it for praise or even thanks. I knew better than to expect that, but I did hope, somewhere deep down in that soft, bruised part of my chest, that maybe they'd notice. That maybe they'd look at me one Thanksgiving, one random Tuesday, one damn Mother's Day, and say, "Hey, Rach, we know what you've been doing. We see it. Thank you." But those words never came. Instead, I got that line about relying on them, and suddenly every unspoken favor and every overdraft fee I'd eaten for their comfort came boiling to the surface. It started small, like these things always do. 6 years ago, Dad called me in the middle of a workday, his voice tight, clipped, like he was trying to sound casual and failing. "Hey, Rach, your mom's phone ain't working again. Mind taking a look at the bill? Just temporarily." Temporarily. That was the word he used. Like I was a bank with no interest, just a checkout window for emergencies that never seemed to end. I logged in and saw the overdue balance, $300-something, mostly late fees and data overages. I paid it. No big speech, no judgment. Just clicked submit and texted Mom to tell her it should be back on soon. She sent back a heart emoji and then asked if I could swing by next week with printer ink. Then came Kyle's DUI. I wasn't there the night it happened, but I heard about it through our cousin Linda, who apparently saw his mugshot before anyone else. It was his second. No one in the family mentioned that part out loud. I got a call the next morning, Kyle, panicked and whispering like a teenager busted after curfew. "They're gonna suspend my license, Rach, and I'm supposed to drive to Knoxville on Monday for the site audit. I can't lose this job, not now." The bail bondsman needed $800, and he needed a co-signer. I wired the money, didn't sleep that night, and sat in silence the next morning as Mom told the story like Kyle was the victim. "He just had a couple beers too many. It happens," she said, slicing sweet potatoes like she was defending a saint. The cops these days are just looking to pick on folks. I sat there, the invisible hand behind the curtain, and said nothing. 3 years ago, their mortgage went into delinquency. I didn't even know until Mom casually dropped a comment over coffee. "Banks being a pain again," she said, swirling creamer into her cup like it was a joke. "Thinking about refinancing, but your dad's credit's still garbage." I should have said no. I should have drawn a line in the sand. But instead, I looked over the papers, sighed, and co-signed on a 20-year refinance because, according to the loan officer, I was the only one in the family with decent credit. And still, they never saw me. Not really. Not beyond the weird, artsy one who never gave them grandkids or made 6 figures or moved back home to work in construction like Kyle did. Over the course of 6 years, I paid their phone bills, their utilities when the gas got shut off twice, chipped in on car repairs, and sent money, just until Friday, more times than I could count. I put at least $12,000 a year toward keeping their lives from unraveling, money I never expected to see again, money that could have built my savings, my future, my own life. And let me tell you, I'd paid at least $12,000 a year for 6 years straight. That's about $54,000. Yeah, go ahead, check the math. I know you want to, but I never said a word. Because silence, in our family, wasn't just a habit, it was tradition. You didn't talk about money, and you especially didn't talk about who had less or who gave more. It was all about appearances. As long as the lights stayed on, the fridge stayed full, and no one showed up drunk to church, everything was fine. And me? I was the fixer, the behind-the-scenes tech support, the quiet daughter who never made a scene. Until that night. After dessert, when the plates were pushed aside and the second bottle of wine had dulled the edges of conversation, I quietly slipped into the guest bedroom. Mom still called it my old room, though none of my things remained. I pulled out my laptop. I opened tabs like a surgeon prepping for surgery. Verizon, Progressive, Capital One, the mortgage portal. Each one had my name somewhere on it. Authorized user. Primary cardholder. Emergency contact. I didn't hesitate. Didn't give myself the luxury of doubt or second-guessing. One by one, I removed my name, shut it down, canceled autopay, and made sure any future bills would bounce like a rubber check in a thunderstorm. And with each confirmation email, I felt lighter. Not free, not yet, but untethered in a way I hadn't known I needed. I thought about Kyle waking up with no data. About Mom at Walgreens trying to swipe a card that no longer worked. About Dad calling the bank and being told he no longer had a cosigner. The thought didn't make me feel guilty. It made me feel awake. That night, after pie, I pulled up every account I had my name on. I didn't sleep. I just canceled. The morning after Thanksgiving always carried a heavy quiet, like the house was hungover from too much food, too much wine, too much forced cheer and bad air between people pretending they still liked each other. In most families, that silence might mean rest, recovery, or leftovers reheated in microwaves by people wearing pajamas and slippers. But in mine, it meant the first round of complaints would start trickling in. Mom realizing no one helped clean the kitchen, Kyle bragging about how much he ate, Dad bitching about how everyone left the lights on. But that morning, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the air was pushing me down into my mattress. I woke up early, pulled on a hoodie, and sat at my kitchen table with a mug of strong black coffee and the dull hum of freedom buzzing just beneath my skin. I'd canceled everything I had access to, every account, every automatic payment, every quiet piece of myself that had been embedded into their lives like a screw in drywall. I thought maybe, just maybe, it would take them a week or two to notice. But I underestimated how quickly chaos finds its way and when comfort dies. It started just after 9. My phone buzzed with the first alert. Payment declined for account ending in 7201. Electric company. I took another sip of coffee and stared out the window where the neighbors' kids were already putting up Christmas lights too early, like they always did. 10 minutes later, autopay failed for family plan, Verizon Wireless. Then another, streaming account suspended due to non-payment. That one made me smile. I hoped Kyle missed the ending of whatever show he was binging. By 10:30, the calls started coming. Kyle first, of course. He never waited to think. He just exploded like a kid who didn't get the toy he wanted. Ratch, what the hell's going on? He barked the second I answered. No hello, no how are you, just fire. Mom's phone ain't working, the damn Wi-Fi's down, and my insurance app says my policy's lapsed. Did something happen with the payments? I leaned back in my chair, swirled what was left of my coffee, and said nothing for a second. Then I gave him the softest possible version of the truth. I took my name off everything, I said. It was overdue. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then he launched into a lecture, how I should have warned them, how he had responsibilities, how this was going to ruin his weekend. I listened. I didn't respond. I hung up when he called me selfish. That word stuck in my ear like a splinter. The texts from Mom were gentler at first. Sweetheart, is something wrong with the phone plan? Then, a few minutes later, Dad says the electricity payment didn't go through? And then, did something happen? It was that last one that made me pause. Because that was the closest thing to concern I'd heard from her in years. Not about my life, my work, my health, but about their comforts, their routine, their little ecosystem crumbling now that the invisible support beam had been yanked away. I didn't answer. I put the phone face down on the table and stared at the condensation ring it left on the wood, like a ghostly little stamp of presence. The house felt quiet, but not in that heavy, sad way. It felt quiet like peace feels right before you remember you forgot something important. I should have felt relief, maybe even glee. Instead, I just felt alert. Like I'd finally started speaking a language no one else in the room understood, and now I had to wait for them to either learn it or keep shouting nonsense at me. I didn't feel cruel. I felt surgical. Precise. This wasn't punishment. It was correction. I didn't owe them explanations. Not after years of pretending their guilt trips were generosity. Not after financing their comfort and being told, even indirectly, that I was a burden. Let them sit in the dark for a day. Let them call the companies and ask questions and see how much of their adult lives were, in fact, quietly held up by their disappointment daughter. Maybe mom would have to go in person to the phone store, that tiny strip mall one with the rude teenager at the counter, and explain she didn't know the account password. Maybe Kyle would get pulled over again and realize his insurance card was useless, and maybe this time he wouldn't have me to call. And maybe, just maybe, they'd start to understand. Around noon, I left the house. I needed air. I walked the 3 blocks to the old bookstore downtown that always smelled like paper and ghosts, bought myself a novel I'd already read twice, and sat in the corner chair with a peppermint tea and nothing to do. No one needed me. No alarms, no bills, no fires to put out. My phone buzzed again, another missed call from Mom. I let it ring. I stayed there until the sun dipped low and the streets turned that coppery kind of soft. On the walk back, I thought about whether I'd eventually call her back, maybe explain things gently, with some kind of grace. Maybe, maybe not. I hadn't decided yet. But just as I reached my porch, just as I pulled my keys from my coat pocket, I heard it. The knock. Not hard. Not frantic. Just 3 deliberate knocks on my door, like punctuation at the end of a sentence I hadn't read yet. And I knew she'd come. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, I noticed immediately how out of place she looked, not because she was somewhere unfamiliar, but because for the first time in years, maybe decades, she wasn't in control of the situation. My mother had always carried herself like someone who knew the rules and made damn sure everybody else followed them, but right then, she looked like someone who'd lost the script. Her lips were pressed together so tightly, they had almost disappeared into a single pale line, and her eyes kept moving around, up to the porch light, down to the welcome mat she gave me 5 Christmases ago, and finally to my face, where she stopped, held, and blinked too slowly to hide the tension behind her carefully ironed expression. She didn't ask to come in. She just stood there, clutching her purse like it might float away if she let go, and said the words I had been expecting ever since I canceled the last auto payment linked to my name. "You didn't really do all that, did you?" Her voice cracked a little on the last syllable, not in a dramatic, tearful way, but like the moment had finally grown too big for her throat. She was trying to act calm, poised, unbothered, but her voice gave her away. I stepped aside and gestured silently for her to come in, and for a few seconds she didn't move, like crossing the threshold meant accepting something she wasn't ready to name. Eventually, she stepped in and sat down in the stiff-backed armchair she used to complain about every time she visited. I didn't speak right away. I went to the kitchen, poured hot water over the last peppermint tea bag I had left, and brought her a mug without asking if she wanted one. She looked down at it with the vague suspicion of someone being handed an unfamiliar object by a stranger. I sat across from her, not on the couch, too casual, but in the chair I kept near the bookshelf, the one where I usually read at night with a blanket over my legs and silence all around me. It wasn't a conversation I wanted to have, but it was one I was done avoiding. I said simply, no anger in my tone, no smugness either, just fact. She flinched a little, like she'd been hoping I'd tell her it was all some mistake, that she could go home and call the electric company and be told everything was fine, just a hiccup, no need to worry. But she knew better. She knew I'd meant it. And I knew she knew, which was the only reason I didn't soften it. This wasn't about punishment. It was about exposure. But why? She asked, her voice thinner now, more fragile than I had expected from someone who used to terrify waitresses with a single glance. Why would you just cut everything off without telling us first? I took a breath, then leaned back in my chair and looked her square in the eye, just like she used to do when I'd done something ungrateful as a kid, like refusing to wear the itchy dress she liked or forgetting to say thank you loud enough in front of company. Because you never asked how any of it worked, I said. You just assumed it would be there. You assumed I would always be there. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to deny, but I held up a hand, not to silence her with force, just to say, wait, listen, I'm not finished. For years, I paid the phone bill. Not just yours, not just Dad's, Kyle's too. Every month, quietly, without a word, because you told me once it was too hard to keep track of all the plans and passwords. I paid your internet, your streaming services, your overdue car insurance premiums. I paid for the security system on the house, the water heater repair last spring, the new tires for Dad's truck. I co-signed on your mortgage refinance when no one else's credit would qualify. I bailed Kyle out of jail after his second DUI and paid for the insurance increase when the premiums shot up. Her mouth was slightly open now, like she was trying to take in air, but found none of it breathable. She looked at the tea again, but didn't touch it. We never asked you to do all that, she said, and those words were so familiar they scraped across my skin like sandpaper. I laughed, softly, without humor. You didn't have to, I said. That was the genius of it. You let me think it was my choice. But it was never really a choice, was it? Because the moment I said no, I became the ungrateful one, the selfish one, the one who forgot where she came from. She started to speak, then stopped. For a moment, I saw the sharpness return to her eyes, the part of her that was always ready to weaponize guilt. We've done a lot for you too, Rachel, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. We gave you a roof when you were starting out. We fed you when work was slow. We helped. I interrupted her, not harshly, but firmly. I paid rent every month when I lived there, even when I didn't have work. And you know what else I did? I never told anyone that I was the one paying your electric bill every winter. I never mentioned that I kept food in your fridge when the pantry was low. I did all that because I believed it was love. But now I think it was just a way to keep me small, to keep me tied to a family that only sees me when they need something. She stood up suddenly, like the room had gotten too hot or too tight or just too truthful to stay in. She smoothed her coat, glanced at the door, and then turned to face me with a look I couldn't quite read. I didn't know, she whispered, like it was the only thing left she could say that didn't require responsibility. I didn't respond. I wasn't looking for an apology. I wasn't looking for a breakdown or a reconciliation. I was only trying to hand her the weight she had placed on me for years, whether she meant to or not. At the door, she turned back one last time. Her voice was almost gone now. I don't even know who you are anymore. I smiled just enough for it to sting. That's because you never bothered to look. She looked at me like a stranger. I almost felt bad. Almost. I didn't go back right away. I waited 3 full days after the knock on my door, 3 days of unread texts, 3 days of silence that buzzed with more noise than words ever could. I didn't go because I wanted to, or because I missed them, or because some hopeful part of me thought maybe they had finally seen the light. I went because I needed to. Not for closure, not even for revenge. I needed to walk through the walls that raised me, look the mess in the eye, and feel nothing. That was the goal. Not forgiveness, not understanding, not peace. Just nothing. The drive there felt longer than it was, as if the weight of years sat in the passenger seat beside me, staring straight ahead with arms crossed and judgment thick in the air. I had made the trip to that house more times than I could count: birthdays, Christmases, quick Sunday dinners, tense Monday mornings after a holiday that went sour. But this time was different. This time I wasn't coming to be polite, or to smooth things over, or to carry another unspoken load. I came to return something. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, not in any measurable way, but in presence. The porch light was off even though it was late afternoon and already dipping into gray, and the curtains in the living room window were half drawn like they couldn't decide whether to let me in or keep me out. I grabbed the manila envelope off the passenger seat, the one that held exactly 28 pages, each one listing payments, dates, confirmation numbers, account names, all black and white and indisputable. I printed it at the library. I wanted them to hold it, not swipe through it on a phone. I wanted them to feel the weight of every decision I'd made on their behalf. The front door was unlocked, as always. That house hadn't been properly locked in 15 years, probably longer. It creaked when I pushed it open, and for the first time I noticed the way the carpet in the entryway curled up on the edges, the discoloration near the baseboards, the faint smell of stale air and cooked onions that seemed baked into the walls. My father was in the recliner, remote in hand, television off. He didn't look at me, didn't speak, just sat there with his jaw clenched, eyes locked on the blank screen like it was playing the only thing he still trusted. My brother was on the couch, head down, thumbing something on his phone with the intensity of someone trying not to exist. Neither of them moved. Neither said a word. Nancy was in the kitchen. She must have heard the door because she turned before I even walked in, drying her hands on a dish towel that had long since stopped looking clean. Her face lit up in that forced, flickering way she used when trying to pretend nothing was wrong. "You came," she said, like I had accepted some unspoken invitation. I was just, and then she stopped herself, glanced at the nearly empty fridge, the sink full of dishes, and the silence crawling through the walls like a second presence. I didn't respond. I placed the envelope on the table, right next to the jar of sugar she kept forgetting to refill, and sat down in the chair closest to the wall, the one I used to lean back in when I was 15 and still hoping someone would notice if I disappeared. She stared at the envelope like it might contain something dangerous. Eventually, she reached for it and slid out the pages, her eyes scanning the first sheet slowly. I didn't speak. I didn't explain. I let the numbers say everything. She flipped through 2 more pages, her hands starting to tremble just slightly. "This can't be right," she whispered. "You paid all this?" I nodded once. That was all she got. No monologue, no breakdown, no justification. Just yes. Kyle finally looked up, eyes bloodshot, mouth twitching like he wanted to say something cruel, but couldn't find the words to make it sting. "So you're done with us now?" he asked, bitterness dripping from each syllable. I didn't answer. He didn't deserve an answer. Not after the years of silence he traded for help. Not after the endless moments he had to say thank you and chose instead to act like it was owed. Nancy sat down across from me, still holding the papers. "We didn't know, Rachel. We didn't realize how much you were doing." Her voice cracked, more honest now, not theatrical, not performative. "We just thought. I mean, you never said anything. You always acted like it was no big deal." I took a deep breath. Not the kind you take before saying something profound, but the kind that's meant to steady you when you're too close to the past and the present at the same time. "That was your mistake," I said softly. "You thought silence meant yes." There was a long pause, the kind that settles between people who finally know there's nothing left to argue. And then, she said it. The thing I didn't expect. The thing that should have come years ago, but now felt too late to bloom. "What if we say sorry?" she asked. Her voice was almost childlike. Vulnerable. Small. And for a moment, a breath, a blink, a beat, I felt something shift inside me. Not sympathy, not reconciliation. Just the echo of who I used to be, the part of me that wanted to believe people could change if you just loved them hard enough. But I didn't answer. I stood up, buttoned my coat, and walked out the door. In the car, I sat still for a while. The air was cold but clean, the kind of cold that wakes you up, makes you feel every inch of your skin. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even look back at the house. I just smiled, not because I'd won, not because they lost, but because for the first time in years, I was finally free. There's no villain in this story, just people too used to kindness they never earned.